In the vast, interconnected galaxy, a coalition of alien races had observed and catalogued countless species, from the most primitive to the technologically advanced. None had ever perplexed them quite like humans. The inhabitants of Earth, a planet that appeared so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, had captivated the attention of the alien class in ways no one had anticipated. What was it about these seemingly ordinary beings that made them so intriguing? The first of the aliens to observe Earth was the Xenar, a race of beings with the ability to manipulate energy and matter at will. They had conquered countless galaxies, bent entire ecosystems to their will, and interacted with races that had long since reached the peak of their civilization. To them, humanity should have been a passing curiosity, another in the long list of primitive species they catalogued without much thought. But humans weren't like any other species they had encountered. The first human the Xenar had observed was a man named Jack. He was not a leader or a scientist. He was an average citizen of Earth, living in a city not far from a massive, bustling metropolis. Jack woke up one ordinary morning, stretched, and stumbled into his kitchen, groggy from sleep. The Xenar, using their advanced technology, studied him closely from their hidden position in orbit, their sensors finely tuned to even the smallest of human actions. Jack's movements were simple, mechanical almost. He opened the fridge, pulled out a carton of eggs, and cracked one into a pan. The Xenar were intrigued. There was nothing unusual about this action, at least not from their perspective. Yet, as Jack began preparing his breakfast, the aliens couldn't help but be confused. They had long understood the concepts of sustenance and nourishment, of eating to survive, but they had never seen a species go about it in such a manner. It wasn't just the action itself. It was the ritualistic, almost meditative way Jack approached his breakfast. There was no urgency, no sign of hunger or need. Just a calm, deliberate set of motions, a seemingly insignificant series of steps that felt oddly meaningful. The Xenar, who had studied human physiology and behavior in great detail, could not understand why Jack would spend time crafting his breakfast in such a methodical way. Their own species did not engage in such mundane rituals. Their sustenance was delivered through energy transfer, instantaneous and efficient. But Jack wasn't just eating. No, this seemed to be something more. He hummed as he prepared his meal, a slight smile curling on his lips as he cracked each egg with care. What was the purpose of this ritual? Why the careful attention to each motion? Was it a form of cultural expression? Perhaps it held some deeper significance they had yet to uncover. The Xenar decided to dig deeper. They deployed a series of drones to monitor Jack more closely, tracking his every movement, measuring his heart rate, and analyzing his brainwaves. To their shock, Jack's brain activity showed patterns that indicated a high level of cognitive engagement despite the apparent simplicity of the task. There was something extraordinary in his mental focus. The Xenar had seen advanced species engage in complex rituals and ceremonies, but this was different. This was a human, preparing a breakfast with such devotion, as if the very act of making food held the key to something greater. Jack wasn't aware of the alien interest, of course. He had no idea that a race of highly advanced beings was studying him from afar, attempting to decipher the purpose behind his actions. For him, breakfast was simply a way to start the day. He cracked the eggs, poured the milk, and scrambled them together in the pan. The rhythmic sound of the spatula against the hot surface filled the air as he moved on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. To him, it was just another morning, another breakfast. But to the Xenar, it was an enigma. Days turned into weeks, and the Xenar's fascination only grew. They had tried to make sense of it by consulting their vast archives, looking for any clue as to why humans attached such meaning to their seemingly simple actions. They scoured the entire history of human culture, but they found no direct explanation. No ritual, no tradition, no scientific principle that could explain this behavior. Jack's breakfast didn't fit into any category the Xenar were familiar with. It wasn't a religious practice. It wasn't a social custom. It wasn't even something humans did to survive. It was just breakfast. What had started as a simple observation had now turned into an obsession. The Xenar began to suspect that there was something far more significant at play. Could it be that this was the key to understanding humanity? The entire race, a species that had lived for eons, had never encountered anything so perplexing. How could something so basic hold such complexity? Could this breakfast, this very mundane act, hold the secret to humanity's true potential? As the days passed, the Xenar grew more and more agitated. They began to suspect that Jack's seemingly insignificant ritual wasn't just about food. It was a symbol, a microcosm of human culture, and perhaps even their future. It represented something deeper, something that went beyond the individual and reached into the heart of humanity itself. But what was it? What was Jack's breakfast truly about? The Xenar's attempts to understand had only deepened the mystery. Every theory they developed seemed more absurd than the last. Perhaps Jack's breakfast was a form of communication, some kind of coded message that humans sent through their actions, rather than words. Maybe it was a test, something designed to measure Jack's worth, or perhaps humanity's worth, in the grand scheme of the galaxy. The more the Xenar pondered, the more questions they had, and the less they understood. At last, the Xenar realized that they had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed that every species, no matter how simple or advanced, had to follow a logical, structured set of behaviors. They had forgotten one key element. Humans were not bound by the same rules that governed other species. They were unpredictable. They were creative. They were capable of seeing meaning in the smallest of actions, finding purpose where others saw none. But what the Xenar didn't know was that Jack wasn't trying to communicate with them at all. He wasn't aware of their observation, and if he had known, he would have found the whole idea laughable. To him, breakfast was just a moment of peace in an otherwise chaotic world, a moment where he could ground himself before the day ahead. It was a ritual in the simplest sense, yet it held more significance than the Xenar could ever hope to understand. The breakfast wasn't an alien puzzle to be solved. It was just human. The Xenar's curiosity about the human breakfast deepened as they began to analyze every minute detail of Jack's morning routine. They focused all of their immense computational power on the seemingly innocuous actions that Jack performed every day. It was clear to them now that they weren't dealing with a simple creature. Humans, despite their primitive technology, had a sophistication in their daily lives that was baffling. The Xenar had assumed that humans were fundamentally like any other species, biologically driven, their actions governed by survival instincts and basic needs. They ate to fuel their bodies, slept to restore energy, and interacted with the world around them purely through the lens of necessity. But as they watched Jack over the course of several weeks, it became clear that he wasn't merely fulfilling a basic need for sustenance. There was something else at play here, something they couldn't quite pinpoint. The first thing the Xenar noticed was Jack's calmness. There was no rush in his actions, no urgency. His every move seemed measured, deliberate, as if he were performing some sacred task, one that he had done thousands of times before. The Xenar's researchers were puzzled. Why would Jack go through the trouble of cracking each egg with such precision, handling them with a reverence that seemed unwarranted for something so commonplace? They had never encountered such behavior among other species, who simply consumed their food without the careful contemplation that Jack displayed. It wasn't just the cracking of eggs that intrigued them, it was the whole process. The way Jack moved from the stove to the counter and back, the rhythm with which he stirred the eggs, the way he poured milk into his cereal as though it were an act of creativity rather than necessity. Each step was precise and consistent, yet seemingly devoid of any higher purpose. Or so the Xenar thought. To them, it appeared that Jack's breakfast had to have some hidden, deeper meaning. No other species they had observed exhibited such care and focus for something as mundane as food preparation. They began to wonder if perhaps Jack's actions were an encrypted message, a series of motions meant to communicate something far more complex than a simple meal. After all, the Xenar were masters of communication, capable of conveying entire ideas through energy pulses and subatomic signals. Surely, Jack's breakfast ritual must contain hidden codes or encrypted data. The aliens consulted their most advanced algorithms, attempting to decode the sequence of motions Jack performed every morning. But the more they looked, the less sense it made. Their first theory was that Jack's breakfast routine was a form of human ritual, perhaps a sacred tradition passed down through generations. They theorized that food, especially something as basic as breakfast, might hold spiritual significance for humans. Perhaps, like many ancient civilizations, Jack was participating in a rite that connected him to his ancestors or to the universe itself. They scoured ancient human texts, looking for any reference to similar rituals, but found nothing that aligned with Jack's actions. No records of a sacred breakfast. No documentation that suggested humans held their food preparation in any particular reverence. The Xenar dismissed this hypothesis, but they quickly formulated another theory. Maybe Jack's breakfast was a form of personal expression. Perhaps this simple act was a manifestation of his personality or emotional state. Humans, after all, were known for their vast range of emotions, and they often found meaning in mundane activities, like cooking or eating. It could be that Jack's breakfast was a daily affirmation, an act of self-care or comfort that helped him prepare mentally for the challenges of the day ahead. Then came the discovery that shifted their thinking entirely. The Xenar had set up a covert monitoring system that allowed them to track Jack's physiological responses as he prepared his breakfast. Their intention was to measure his heart rate, brain activity, and hormone levels to determine if there was any physiological change that could indicate deeper significance. They had seen species with elaborate rituals who exhibited spikes in heart rate, elevated adrenaline, or heightened dopamine levels. If Jack's breakfast held meaning, they reasoned, there might be a corresponding physical reaction. But when the results came back, they were nothing short of baffling. Jack's heart rate remained steady, his brainwaves calm, and his hormone levels didn't shift at all during the entire process. It was as though Jack was completely unaffected by the ritual, or at least unaffected in ways that would be obvious to the Xenar's technology. He wasn't undergoing some sort of emotional or psychological transformation during his breakfast. There was no internal drama, no burst of creative insight, no deep reflection on his day. Yet, he continued, day after day, to follow the same routine with quiet, unwavering precision. This posed a new question for the Xenar. If Jack wasn't feeling anything unusual, why did he continue with the ritual? Why did he take so much care with something as trivial as breakfast? To the Xenar, it was starting to look less like a personal ritual and more like a subconscious action, something that had become so ingrained in Jack's daily routine that he didn't even need to think about it. Yet this raised another issue. How could a species like humans, who had mastered tools and technologies, continue to engage in something so primitive as this? If Jack's breakfast wasn't meaningful to him, why did he continue to put so much effort into it? The Xenar were now faced with a paradox. On the surface, Jack's breakfast seemed to be a mundane, pointless task, something that could be performed with minimal thought and effort. The aliens began to piece together a new theory, one that centered around the idea of human resilience. It seemed that Jack's breakfast was an expression of something greater, an embodiment of humanity's ability to find meaning and purpose even in the most mundane aspects of life. It was not the food itself that mattered, but the act of preparing it, the act of creating something from nothing. Jack wasn't just feeding his body, he was reaffirming his existence, his agency in the universe. The Xenar, with all their vast intelligence and technological power, had underestimated this fundamental aspect of humanity. Jack wasn't just a simple, primitive creature. He was embodying the essence of human strength, the ability to find purpose in the smallest, most ordinary actions. And in this realization, the Xenar saw something they had never expected. Humanity's power wasn't in its technology, or its ability to manipulate energy, or its superior intellect. No, humanity's power was in its simplicity, in its ability to transform even the smallest tasks into acts of meaning. Jack's breakfast was not just a meal. It was a symbol of humanity's quiet, unassuming strength, a strength that the Xenar, for all their knowledge, had failed to understand. As the Xenar's investigation into the human breakfast continued, their attempts to decode its meaning had only increased the layers of confusion. Their previous conclusions, though seemingly insightful, were becoming more difficult to sustain. They had started to see Jack's actions not as a mundane ritual, but as a clue to something far more elusive. Their earlier assumptions that it was a simple act of sustenance had given way to theories of hidden symbols, encoded messages, and even profound rituals. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of discovering something monumental about humanity. But with every theory they explored, the more perplexing the breakfast became. The Xenar had moved beyond just observing Jack's actions. They were now running simulations, using their vast technological resources to mimic the actions of Jack's breakfast routine. They had attempted to replicate the process themselves, attempting to recreate the exact motions, using their own advanced machines and tools. They tried every possible configuration, every detail, but each time, the results were flawed. The eggs would crack too easily, the heat from their cooking surface was inconsistent, or the mixture wouldn't blend properly. The Xenar, with all their technological prowess, were unable to replicate the simple act of preparing breakfast in the exact way Jack did. This was a breakthrough of sorts. It was becoming increasingly clear that this seemingly trivial human ritual was not something that could be easily copied or understood by their advanced technology. The alien race had encountered countless species and cultures over the millennia, each with their own customs and traditions. Many of these were complex, often deeply symbolic, and usually tied to specific beliefs or needs. Yet, none of them had been so resistant to their understanding as Jack's breakfast. And it wasn't just the act itself that they couldn't grasp, it was the very simplicity with which Jack performed it. The Xenar's own species had mastered technology to such an extent that they had lost the need for simple, daily rituals. Their sustenance was a matter of energy transfer. Their minds had long transcended the physical, the mundane. They found it baffling that a species as primitive as humans could find purpose in something so small, so ordinary. This misunderstanding escalated into a sense of unease among the Xenar. They had spent so much time trying to analyze Jack's breakfast, but now they were questioning whether they were even capable of truly understanding it. After several moments of silent observation, the Xenar finally decided to speak. Their voices, amplified by their technology, echoed in Jack's mind. They didn't speak aloud, they didn't need to. Their words were delivered directly to his consciousness, a voice that sounded almost alien, yet oddly familiar. "Human," the Xenar spoke. "We have observed you for many cycles. Your daily ritual, the breakfast you prepare, holds meaning. Tell us what it is. Why does it hold such significance?" Jack's reaction was not what the Xenar had expected. Instead of being startled or intimidated, he simply paused for a moment, his hands stilling in mid-motion. He glanced up, as though considering the question, then returned his attention to the eggs in front of him. "It's just breakfast," Jack said nonchalantly, his voice calm. "I've been doing this for years. It's just the way I start my day." The Xenar were stunned. They had anticipated a more complex answer, something profound or enigmatic. But Jack's response was shockingly simple, so simple that it threw their entire investigation into disarray. They had been overcomplicating things, twisting themselves in knots, searching for some deeper meaning that didn't exist. The truth was right in front of them all along. Jack's breakfast wasn't a puzzle to be solved or a symbol to be deciphered. It was quite simply a part of his daily routine, something that helped him prepare mentally for the day ahead. There was no hidden message, no ancient ritual, no cosmic significance. It was just breakfast. But this realization didn't sit well with the Xenar. They were left to wrestle with the implications of what they had just learned. The humans weren't like the other species they had encountered, species that were defined by their rituals, their traditions, their need for meaning. Humans, it seemed, had the ability to embrace the mundane without needing to assign it some grand significance. They found meaning in the simplest of actions, but they didn't feel the need to justify it to anyone. The Xenar were faced with a humbling truth. They had been looking for something extraordinary in Jack's breakfast, but in doing so, they had overlooked the very essence of humanity. The strength of the human race wasn't in their rituals, their symbols, or their customs. It was in their ability to find meaning in the ordinary, in the everyday. It was in their quiet resilience, their capacity to continue, even when there was no grand purpose. Jack didn't need to explain why he made breakfast. He didn't need to make it a grand statement. It was simply a part of who he was, an expression of his existence, as ordinary as the air he breathed. The Xenar had learned something unexpected and perhaps more significant than any discovery they had made before. Humanity's strength lay in its ability to make the ordinary extraordinary, to find meaning in the smallest of actions without needing external validation. The Xenar had seen countless civilizations and explored the furthest reaches of the galaxy, but they had never encountered anything quite like this. And in that moment, they realized just how deeply they had underestimated humans. They weren't primitive after all. They were powerful in ways the Xenar had failed to comprehend. The true mystery was not Jack's breakfast, but the human ability to see depth where others saw none. The Xenar, in their profound understanding of cosmic intelligence, had always prided themselves on their ability to discern patterns and reveal the hidden truths behind the seemingly ordinary. Yet, as they continued to ponder over Jack's breakfast, they began to realize something that would forever change their perception of humanity. This simple act, which they had spent so much time trying to understand, was not something to be decoded or solved. It was a reflection of the human capacity for simplicity in a complex universe. It was an embodiment of resilience in its purest form. Their attempt to analyze Jack's breakfast had led them on a long journey, a journey that began with the assumption that there had to be more to it. The Xenar had believed that the human mind, so primitive in comparison to their own, must surely have deeper intentions hidden within even the simplest of tasks. They had searched for secret codes, hidden messages, and encrypted meanings, but each attempt led to a deeper realization that the true mystery lay not in the food, but in the act itself. The Xenar had witnessed countless civilizations, each one marked by its struggles, triumphs, and rituals. They had seen species that built complex systems of meaning around their daily tasks, developing vast philosophies and intricate codes of behavior. In contrast, humans seemed to exist in a different realm. They did not require grand gestures to make their existence meaningful. In fact, the simplicity of Jack's breakfast, his ability to make something so basic an act of care and precision, was, in its own way, more profound than any complex ritual the Xenar had observed in other civilizations. There was a humility in the act that resonated deeply within the Xenar. They began to see that this apparent simplicity was not a lack of meaning, it was a different kind of meaning, one that was not tied to grandiosity or complexity. It was grounded in the human ability to find joy, satisfaction, and purpose in the everyday. The Xenar, who had often searched for meaning in the abstract, now found themselves drawn to the tangible, the immediate, the real. Jack's breakfast was not about some grand cosmic truth, nor was it about achieving a higher state of understanding. It was simply about Jack taking the time to care for himself, to begin his day with an act of self-sufficiency that brought him comfort. And in this small act, the Xenar saw the power of humanity to derive purpose from the smallest of actions. But what troubled the Xenar even more was the realization that this very simplicity was something they could never replicate. Their technology, their vast intelligence, their ability to comprehend entire galaxies, none of it could allow them to engage in the same way that Jack did. It wasn't just about the act itself, but the approach to the act. Jack didn't need to justify his breakfast. He didn't need to attach any greater significance to it. He did it because it was part of his day, part of his rhythm, part of his existence. The Xenar, by contrast, had lost touch with such grounding simplicity in their own lives. They had become so focused on higher concepts, abstract intelligence, and mastery of the universe that they had forgotten the importance of the small, personal acts that make life meaningful. The Xenar's leaders, in their growing realization, began to feel a sense of humility they had never experienced before. They had expected humans to be an enigma to be solved, a puzzle to be unraveled. But what they had discovered instead was that humanity, in its raw simplicity, was an enigma that could not be solved. It simply had to be accepted. There was no deeper secret behind Jack's breakfast. The true power of humanity was not hidden in codes or symbols. It was in their ability to live in the moment, to find value in the ordinary, and to carry on through life's smallest acts with a quiet strength that the Xenar had never fully appreciated. In the quiet of their observation, the Xenar understood something crucial. They had spent so much time analyzing Jack's breakfast as if it held the key to unlocking human potential, when in fact, it was the very act of analyzing it that missed the point. The beauty of the human experience lay in its ability to find meaning in what was right in front of them, without the need to look for it in the abstract. The simple routine of cracking eggs, stirring a mixture, and adding milk was, in its own way, an act of profound strength. Humans did not need to overcomplicate their existence. They could find meaning in the most basic, unassuming acts, and in doing so, they displayed a resilience that no algorithm or analysis could truly quantify. This newfound understanding of humanity was a turning point for the Xenar. They had been so consumed by their search for patterns, by their desire to see the universe through a lens of complexity and intellectual mastery, that they had overlooked the most fundamental aspect of existence, the power of simplicity. The Xenar began to realize that the very strength of humanity lay in their ability to exist in the moment, to find purpose without needing to justify it to anyone. Jack's breakfast was not an isolated act. It was a reflection of the human approach to life itself, unpretentious, grounded, and resilient. The Xenar now found themselves at a crossroads. They could continue to observe humans, searching for answers that were never meant to be found, or they could embrace what they had learned. They could try to understand humans not as an equation to be solved, but as a species whose strength lay in their very simplicity. It was a difficult truth to accept for beings who had spent centuries mastering every aspect of existence. But in that moment, they saw that the greatest mystery was not in the grandiose theories or cosmic knowledge they had accumulated. It was in the quiet, everyday acts of life that held the deepest meaning. The Xenar, for all their power and intelligence, now stood in awe of humanity. They had come to the conclusion that humans, despite their relative technological inferiority, possessed something far more profound than the Xenar could ever comprehend. They had found meaning in the simplest of actions, something that even the Xenar's advanced algorithms could not capture. Jack's breakfast, in its understated simplicity, had revealed to them the true essence of humanity, a species capable of finding power in the everyday, of seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary, and of embracing life with quiet strength. And so, as the Xenar withdrew, they did not leave with answers. They left with something far more valuable, the understanding that sometimes the greatest mysteries of existence are found not in the complexities of the universe, but in the simple, unassuming actions of the beings that inhabit it.